folks, I'm Marianne Mohanraj. I'm going to be making a little video teaching you how to sew a fabric mask. I'm making this primarily for people who have not sewn before and specifically who haven't used a sewing machine before. You can make these completely by hand with a needle and thread, but if you're going to be making more than one mask, certainly more than 3 or 4, it'll go a lot faster if you use a sewing machine. So this tutorial is mostly aimed at helping you get comfortable with using a machine. So the pattern I'm using is a very simple pattern. It was put out in the very early days of the pandemic here in America by Deaconess Hospital, and they were asking for people to sew these for their nursing staff. I think they are reasonably set at this point. I'm experimenting with other patterns that are more complicated, but this one is really simple and straightforward, and I would say it's well suited for home use. So if you are making masks for your family so that you can take walks and be less likely to either catch COVID-19 or pass it along to others if you are perhaps, you might even be asymptomatic, not know you have it, and this mask makes it a little less likely that you'll accidentally breathe on someone while passing on the sidewalk, although I encourage you to swerve into the street if you need to maintain social distancing space. Also, if you're at the grocery store waiting in line, you have to go up and speak to the checkout person for that last step. The mask will make it less likely that you are going to pass something on to them as they are doing their essential job. So it's a way of, to help you take care of them, for us all to take care of each other. It's probably not the kind of mask you'd want to wear for all day for your job for a variety of reasons, mostly because it's not as fitted as a mask could be. So if you look at something like a N95 mask that healthcare professionals would be using, hopefully, ideally, it has a fitted nose piece here, and that comes with a sort of piece of metal that comes out over the cheekbones. So, and that holds it very close, so that if you are wearing glasses, for example, and you breathe, you shouldn't see your glasses fog up if you're wearing a properly fitted mask. And then it goes and it closes all the way around, and it essentially makes a seal. So these masks are closer to surgical masks, and they are not nearly as fitted, and they don't seal as completely. However, they do reduce the amount of moisture that goes out, especially if you're coughing. They're going to really keep a lot of that from making it past you. We're going to be using 2 pieces of cotton for the front and the back, and then I put in a layer of non-woven material, filter material in between. I'm sewing those in. Again, I intend these for sort of casual use. You're going out of your house for an hour on your once every 2-week grocery run, perhaps. Or you are taking your kids for a walk around the block to get the wiggles out. So you don't have the situation that you might have if you were a healthcare professional, where you'd want a mask with removable filter so that you could change it out as needed, maybe during the course of the day, maybe over a couple of days. These are designed to be used, and then you wash them. They get sterilized in that process, and then they're clean and fresh and ready to use again the next time you have to go out. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of this style of mask. So we'll go ahead for now and talk about fabric. Okay, so 100% cotton is pretty straightforward. There's a ton of it out there. It's something that you can get online easily at Amazon, Etsy. If you want to support independent designers, I highly recommend Spoonflower. It costs a little more, but you can get some amazing, beautiful prints there. The material for the filter is a little more complicated. So what I have here is a non-woven fabric I found on Amazon. It is used for hospital bed sheets, I believe. And it's not super tough. So I would only use this as something that went inside 2 layers of cotton. If you were going to be doing a different style of mask, like there are some people who are doing masks that are cotton on the exterior and then have just a filter fabric on the interior, then you want something tougher than this. This will just dissolve, essentially, if you start throwing it through industrial washing machines over and over and over. So then you can go online and look around. Non-woven materials that people are using a lot as filters are things like the backs of grocery bags, for example, are often a non-woven material that you can cut up and use for this. There are long lists of them that people are putting together, so I recommend going and taking a look. I do want to warn you to not use a couple of things. Some people got very excited about the possibility of using filters, the sort of thing you'd put in your air conditioner that are made often by companies like 3M, because they're meant to filter air particles, and so you would think this would be a good usage. But at least on one thing I saw, they called 3M, and 3M said, we don't recommend it. This filter material is not designed to be closely breathed into by a human being, and so don't put it right next to your mouth. So I wouldn't use that. Some people have also talked about using HEPA vacuum bags and cutting those up. And I've seen conflicting reports. Some people, there's sort of warnings going around that there's particulates in there that will damage your lungs, and then there's other things from the vacuum cleaner bag companies saying, no, that's not true. But regardless, I think it's not generally a recommended option. People are using coffee filters, so I have not seen studies on that and whether that's effective, but you could look into that. There was one study that looked at a variety of things, such as like a dish towel or a t-shirt, and all of those do actually work pretty well for filtering out particles. It's not going to get you to N95 standard where you're filtering out 95% of particles, but you might easily get to, say, 50%, which is a great improvement, right? 50% of particles means that even if you're exposed, you're going to be getting, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but my understanding is that you're just going to be picking up fewer of the particles, you'll be carrying less viral load. If you get sick, you won't get as sick. So it's definitely, I think, we're pretty much in agreement now that it is helpful to have some kind of filtering there. So the dish towel is actually really quite effective, but the problem with it is that it's not very breathable. And so this is something where you're thinking about, well, again, am I a food service worker who's going to be wearing this mask for an 8-hour shift? Then maybe I want something as light and comfortable as possible. Or am I someone who's going to be taking my toddler on a walk around the block, and it's fine if the mask is a little thicker, and my concern is that I want to protect her as much as possible, so I'm going to put in more filter material, thicker filter material. So that's kind of a judgment call, and I would say it's based on who you are sewing for. All right. Now on to cutting. Okay, so I've set up the camera on a little stand so I can actually do this and record at the same time. And I'm planning to cut a fair bit, so I've lined up my mat and I'm aligning this so that there's a little plastic bit here that's going to rest on the edge of the ruler. That makes it easier. And then I just go whoosh, big line down, and you can see you get a beautiful clean cut that way. I'm going to go ahead and do this one, going this way as well. Okay, and I'm actually moving around as I do this because it is easier for me to use the rotary cutter going sort of in a smooth motion away from my body. So if you can move around your work surface, that might be helpful. All right, and then again. Try not to let the fabric move, because if it does, you won't get your clean cuts. And then over here, this bit here and here, this is what's called a selvage, okay? And if you don't care about the pattern, you could just go ahead and use that and incorporate it into what you're doing. You don't have to cut it off the way I'm about to. I'm cutting my selvages off because part of what's making this whole thing tolerable for me is getting to use fun fabrics. This one in particular, I went hunting for Star Trek fabric a while ago, and there actually is very little out there, which makes me think that I want to design Star Trek fabric now. But there's way more Doctor Who and Star Wars fabric, if that's your geekdom of choice. Harry Potter, plenty of stuff, but we're a little short on Star Trek. So, oh yeah, that. I went off the edge of the cutting mat, and so of course it didn't really quite work. But this gives me a lovely, cute fabric with Uhura and Spock, Worf. You should be able to, if you're a Star Trek geek, probably name everybody on here. And I'm hoping that this mask will bring somebody in a stressful situation a little bit of joy. Possibly me. I may end up wearing some of these. So I'm going to finish cutting these out, and then we'll go to the next stage. Okay, so I've cut out a bunch of 6x9 pieces of cotton fabric. I've cut out similarly 6x9 pieces of filter fabric. I have actually 12 cotton pieces, 6 filter pieces. I'm going to make 6 masks out of this. You certainly don't have to do a lot at once. What you'll find if you start making more than a few is that it is, as Henry Ford discovered with automation of cars, factories are effective, which means that if you do the same thing over and over again, you can do it faster and more efficiently. You make fewer mistakes. Surgeons have discovered this too, that if people specialize in doing one procedure over and over, they get much better at that procedure. So if you're going to be cutting fabric and you want to make a lot of masks, it's great to do all your cutting at once. Once you get the hang of it, you want to be sure that you know what you're doing, that you haven't accidentally cut all of your fabric to 5x9 instead of 6x9, for example. There's a saying in sewing, measure twice, cut once. It's the saddest thing when you set out to sew something, you cut all your pieces, and then you realize you've cut the wrong sizes, and you now don't have enough fabric to make that fabulous Victorian ball gown that you are going to wear to the next science fiction convention. So, all right, so we've measured, we've cut. Next is going to be pinning. All right, so this bit is super easy. We have our beautiful little tomato pincushion here, very classic. Pins go in here, needles go in here, because this is thicker and it holds the needle better, so it's less likely to disappear into the depths of the little tomato pincushion. You don't have to pin. Pinning is one of those things, again, that I can be sort of lazy about sometimes. I'm like, oh, I've got it, I don't need to pin it. But in fact, if you don't do it, there's a good chance your fabric will move around with you, on you in the sewing machine, and it just ends up causing more frustration in the long run. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting one piece of fabric down like this, another one like this. This is the right side of the fabric, has the print you like. The wrong side is this side. You'll see the Deaconess pattern, actually, if you look at it, calls for right sides together, which would look like this. If you did that, the finished mask would look the same on both sides. I have started doing it this way instead, so that the finished mask looks like this on the front, this on the back. And the reason is that that was sort of a refinement. Some of the nurses said if you were taking your mask on and off, it helped to know which side was facing the patient and which side was facing your mouth very easily. That makes a really simple visual cue. You can, of course, just write front and back on there with a Sharpie if you made your mask the other way or you get a mask from somebody else. So this one here, filter fabric on top. If you're using it, you can skip the filter fabric if you want to. And then I'm just putting in one pin here and another pin here. And in my experience, that's really enough to hold it together. It's not going to move around now. If you really want, you could put another one here and another one over there. But I don't really think it's necessary. Now you're going to sew. And before we sew, I'm going to take a break and leave this here and talk you through the sewing machine. So before I tell you a lot about sewing machines, I feel like I should explain that I am not an expert seamstress, sewist, whatever you want to call it, in any way, shape, or form. My experience with sewing is mostly at one point, I don't know, when I was 25 or so, a friend helped me make a flapper dress for a Halloween costume using, and I think that was probably the first time I used a sewing machine. I also, at one point, was sewing things, costumes to wear to Ren Fair. Actually, it was to the SCA's Society for Creative Anachronism big war thingy, so I was sewing like medieval gowns. And in theory, you're supposed to sew those by hand because you're recreating the time before sewing machines, but I had a lot of long seams that I did not want to do by hand. So I sacrificed historical authenticity and used a machine. Running a straight seam is really pretty straightforward. And after that, I had many years where all I used my machine for was hemming curtains. It's very useful. It makes it much cheaper to get curtains made and hung that way to exactly the length you want. And for hemming pants, I'm only 5 feet tall, and pants basically never fit me when I buy them at the store, and it's expensive to get them hemmed by a professional, so I learned how to do my own. I'm not great at hemming jeans, but I can usually manage anything else at this point. A few years ago, I started doing a little more alterations, like taking in the sides of tops that didn't fit quite right. I still have a lot to learn there, and I took a sewing class through my local park district that was really helpful, actually. I think it was maybe $60. It was 4 two-hour sessions, and each one we did a project with the sewing machine. So we made a pillow cover, we made a little lunch bag, I can't quite remember what else. But it was great to sort of make concrete things that I could use around the house, and to have a teacher who could stand over me and explain to me what had happened and why my thing had gone completely awry. So once we're able to have classes in person again, I highly recommend taking a class like that. It's super useful, you learn a lot. And certainly you can take them online. Mine is not going to be the best one out there. So YouTube is full of sewing tutorials. So I recommend that you go and watch some by a professional if you have the time. But in case you like looking at me, and you know me from other stuff maybe, and you'd rather learn from me, I thought I would try and take you through a little bit of what I know. Okay, so let's look at my machine. So this is a moderately fancy machine. I would not recommend it to you for this purpose if you're just going out to buy a machine to sew masks. I was looking around online. It looked like you could easily find machines for around $80 at the lower end. Someone told me that Aldi selling a $40 machine. And so if you can find something like that, that's probably gonna be fine for you for this, and for quite a long time to come. I was sewing on a $40 Sears sewing machine for maybe a decade, and it held up really well, and it did everything I needed it to do. This one's fancier. It's electronic. I've never actually had an electronic machine before. I just got it because as I was sewing masks, my old machine jammed up, and I can't get a repair guy out right now. I tried the fixes I knew how to fix. They didn't work, so in the interim, until I can have it repaired, I'm decided it was time to splurge and get a machine that would do embroidery stitches so that I can do things like stitch Serendip Kitchen on little bags that I'm sending out. So I'm excited to play with that once all this is over. It's going to be a little while before I get around to it. The main things you need to know are this right here. In there is a bobbin. In here is a spool of thread. And it's going to be a little different on every machine, but not very different. You're going to have a couple of steps, things that you need to do before you can start sewing. One of them is winding thread onto the bobbin. The other is threading your machine, inserting the bobbin, and then pulling up the bobbin thread. And when you get to this point where it looks like that, you're now ready to sew. So I'm gonna take a step back. I'm gonna take this out, start with a clean bobbin, and walk you through it. Okay, so putting thread on the bobbin. And I have to say, it's a little bit of a sign of love for you that I'm doing this, because I don't love this process, and doing more bobbins than I need to is a little bit of a pain. But I will do it just for you. So I've put my thread, my spool of thread on here, and now there's going to be a way that it needs to be wound to get the tension correct for winding some thread onto the bobbin. So here's where you really have to look at your machine instructions. It'll be something like this, and there's little guides, I don't know if you can see, where it says like 1, 2, 3. There's in fact 2 2s here. This one is super hard for you to see, but there's a 2 there. That's heading you over this way for actually threading the machine, but there's another one up here faintly, and that's going to lead you this way for setting up the bobbin. So I'm winding that over there, I'm winding this over here, I'm winding this over here, and I'm putting this down because that doesn't need to be up. I'm pulling this all the way over here. And so again, this is going to be specific to your machine. And then, let's see whether you can see this. I am taking this thread, I'm putting it through there. Okay, see there's a little hole. I hope you can see that. There's a little hole, and I've put the thread through the hole, and I've pulled some out. And of course, in that process, while I was doing it, this came out, so I have to do it again. And let's see, and I'm looking at the little diagram to make sure I am lining it up correctly. All right. So I think I've got that lined up right now. And then I'm putting this on here, and I'm pulling it over like that. Okay. So now we're basically ready to go. Sometimes you might have something over here that you have to push. Again, look at your instructions. But essentially, you're going to start your machine with a foot pedal usually to go a little bit. Okay. Once you have a little thread wound onto there, then you can go ahead and cut off this excess because it might get jammed up if you're not careful. Okay, and now this bit's kind of fun. You put the pedal down and just let it wind. And it will automatically stop when it's done enough. And it is smoothly winding thread beautifully onto the bobbin. And it'll keep doing that till the bobbin is full or you run out of thread, which I actually just ran out of thread. So, but there's plenty on there. So that's it for that step. I now have a bobbin full of thread ready to go. The way sewing works is that you are basically interlocking, the machine is interlocking thread coming from the top from thread coming from the bottom on the bobbin. So you need it in order to make your stitches actually hold together. So I'm gonna get another spool of thread and then, because this one's all done, then we'll go on. Next step. Okay, so I've got this beautiful bobbin of thread. I'm gonna insert it. There was a cap a cover that I took off here and put it down. I'm gonna put this spool in here And again, follow the instructions on your machine, but usually you're gonna bring the thread over here. There's a little guide that catches it, and then you pull it back. And that's actually kind of ready to go. You could put the cover back on. I usually wait until after I've done the next step because it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. Okay, so now I'm gonna thread the machine. Here, again, do what your machine tells you to do. There's often little diagrams. So this one's telling me the directionality of the thread. So I've put the spool in the right direction. Also, there's usually some kind of thread holder piece. There's probably a name for that. You put it on so that the side matches the size of the spool. All of this is going to help keep your tension good. The better your tension, the less likely it is that your machine will jam. And then you're going to just follow the instructions again on how to thread it. Mine says to go 1, 2, and this is a pretty typical layout. 3, down here, 4, up here, 5, down here, and there's a little thingy there to catch around. Doesn't say 6, but that's 6. And then the next thing is to thread the needle, going from the front to the back, and front to back there. And this can be a little tricky if you don't have great eyesight. I would recommend wetting the very tip of the thread. That makes it easier to thread through the needle. Also, if you if it has a frayed end, I would cut it off so you have a nice, clean, sharp end. I don't think I can take a video and thread at the same time, so we'll be back in a second. Okay, so I have threaded my machine. Thread has gone through, and then I actually pulled it down, through the foot, over here, over there. It can be a little frustrating getting the thread through the needle. So again, if you're having trouble, pause, take a break, trim off a bit of the end. If you've tried a few times, the end might be getting frayed. In general, if you're getting frustrated sewing, which happens a lot, I find that more than knitting, crocheting, almost any other crafting thing I do, sewing can lead to great frustration and desire to curse at my machine. It can also be incredibly satisfying when it's going well. So, you know, I once read a little guide saying that you should come to sewing with a, you know, in your best dress with your makeup on and your hair done. And that was maybe designed for 50s homemakers to shove them into some model of femininity that I don't necessarily recommend. I encourage you to sew in your pajamas, but I do think it helps to be calm and composed when you're sewing. I find it hard to sew when I'm really, really stressed. I make a lot more mistakes. It jams up more. It just causes more difficulty all around. So if it's not going well, take a break, come back, maybe ask somebody else to thread the machine for you, or to deal with the thread tangle. So, okay, now the next bit is to, the next bit is to pull up the bobbin thread. So this I just do by hand. I am going over here to this wheel. This is where you manually turn it. And I'm gonna turn it towards me, which is gonna make the needle go down. When it goes down, it's gonna catch the bobbin thread. Oops, oh, I made a mistake there. Well, we'll see what happens. I didn't leave a lot of thread on the end of my needle, so I may lose it. Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to do this again. Take 2, as I said, don't get frustrated. The sewing machine will tell you to leave, like, the instructions will say leave 4 inches of thread. Leave a good amount of thread for this. So, okay, again, it goes down, it comes up, and see there it's caught the bobbin thread. So at this point, what I would usually do is I would gently kind of pull that, and so I'm sort of pulling this thread here, pulling that, and it's gonna tug up, there we go. So it tugged up a little loop of the bobbin thread, and I'm gonna take something, okay, so don't get frustrated. Leave a good amount. I think it'll, the machine's instruction manual said 4 inches of thread. And then, again, I'm going to manually lower my needle. It's going to catch up the bobbin thread. As you can see, it's starting to pull it. And at this point, I would sort of gently tug here, that same thread, pulling it up. And then use something, here's my little scissors, to get that loop of bobbin thread out. And this is what you want to end up with, is one thread coming down from above from the needle going through the foot, and then the bobbin thread coming from below, coming up through that little hole there. And then you can put your cover back on, and you'll put some fabric in here. You will lower the pressure foot, I think it's called a pressure foot, and you'll be ready to sew. All right, so that was the basics of how to use a sewing machine. We're now going to start actually working on this mask with this fabric. So I've inserted it in. I'm lowering the foot. The first bit is really easy, which is just go, you put your foot down on the, actually I guess this is called the pressure foot. You put your foot down on the foot pedal, and you can go slow, you can go faster, but you want to slow down when you get towards the corner. You're starting sort of in the middle, maybe a third of the way from the corner. And at this point, you are going to need some elastic or fabric ties or bias tape. There are a lot of different options. And if I were clever, I would have cut mine in advance. I didn't, so I'm gonna go do that now. Okay, so technically you don't have to iron at this step, but I think if you do, it makes your life easier. So I usually iron it just a little bit flat. Make sure there's some water in your iron so it steams nicely. All right, I would be careful about ironing the elastics. Don't do that because you might melt them. So then I'm gonna turn it over. You can see here's the wrong side of the fabric is here on the back, and then fold. So about a 1-inch fold. You can measure if you want, not really necessary, I think. Roughly 1 inch. Iron that down. Same thing here. So they're kind of meeting in the middle. On the other side. Okay. Careful not to burn your fingers from the steam. And again, don't iron the elastics. Okay. Then unfold those and fold it in half, and you're gonna iron right here. You're putting in that nice crisp pleat. Just iron that bit there. You don't wanna accidentally take out the creases you just did. Okay, so what you should end up with is a fabric essentially that's been divided into fourths. And what's gonna be great about that is it will make your pleating much easier. So you go like this, you like pick up one of those folds, fold it over a little, pick up the next one, fold it over a little, pick up the next one, fold it over a little. And now you have a very nicely pleated fabric that looks a lot like a surgical mask. At this point, you would normally pin. I've been doing this enough, and I actually kind of hate pinning, so I mostly skip the pinning point and just iron it flat at this point. So what I would do, what I'd recommend is, regardless, go ahead and iron it. So that's gonna help it stay nicely. So in those pleats you just made. But then if you want to stay even more firmly while you're stitching, you put in some pins. So you kind of put in a pin like this, put in one like there, then you do another one here. And so you do 6 pins going down here, 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 here. As I said, I mostly skip that bit right now. So your call. I find that once you iron it, it holds together pretty well if you're careful when you sew. Okay, so then we go off to sew. All right, and this last step is actually really pretty simple. The only thing is take it slow, be patient, and try not to get frustrated if it jams up. So you are going to be at this point sewing over some of those little bumps of elastic that are buried in your fabric. So it can get caught on that. It can get jammed in other ways. Thread tangles are not uncommon. If your machine stops and refuses to keep going, don't try and you mostly can't make it at that point. What you want to do is cut away the thread, take your little pair of scissors and try and cut away any excess thread, pull away any thread, rethread it. Hopefully it'll all be fine at that point. This is the main frustrating thing about sewing, is what happens when your thread tangles and jams, I think. You may have to do that a few bits. You might even have to unscrew the bobbin plate here and take this off and see if you've got a little nest of tangled thread in there that has to be pulled out. Hopefully it won't come to that. But if it does, you've joined legions of beginning sewers, and in fact, sewists, in fact, even experienced sewists have to do that sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to start it. I'm starting at the top right corner, and I'm just going to go forward. And there's all kinds of things that you might do for normals, and I'm maintaining my pleats here. There's things you might do for normal sewing, so that usually, like if I start a fabric, I would use the little reverse button here. Oops, here, let me show you that reverse button to do a couple stitches back and then forward again. I'm not worrying about it now because I'm going to go over this whole thing 2 times, and I find that it really holds it pretty well. Lift, turn the corner. And now I can go kind of fast. I am usually I'm using this foot to line up the fabric. I'm actually going a little bit closer to the edge right now because I want to be sure I catch that bit that was open at the bottom. So it's all under your control. Just take it sort of slow and easy, and you know, make the fabric go where you want it to go. All right, when I get to that corner again, lift, turn. Okay. Here I find that I have to go, so now the pleats are going away from the foot, and I have to be a little careful guiding it, so not going too fast. And you can hear the machine works a little bit harder to get through all those layers of fabric there. But it's going. And in fact, from what I've been hearing, if you have like a relatively inexpensive heavy-duty machine, it may handle this kind of sewing better than the more fancy embroidery style machines. So, and then you finish off that side, and then for strength, you go over the whole thing one more time in a rectangle. So making it much more likely that it'll survive many trips through the wash. Turn. I think you can also sterilize these by baking at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. I have not memorized the details on that, so that's something you might want to look up as an option. And here's my last seam. Alright, and when I get to the end, I'm going to use the handle to pull the needle up. I'm going to lift this, I'm kind of pulling that away, and then I'm going to cut off my threads and cut them in front so it's free of the machine. Cut off all the little extra threads that are left. If you are giving these to healthcare workers, etc., you don't want them to have to deal with that, so take all of that. If you used pins, pull the pins out at this point, whoops, and put them back in your pin cushion, and then you're done. You've got a mask, and it's gonna pleat like this, so be tighter at the corners, and And here's the finished product. Oof, this one's actually a little bit tight, I would say. So I think I might keep this one for kids because it's a little bit small for me, and I'm going to use a longer elastic when I make it for adults. So that's it. Hope it's helpful. Good luck.